Welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's honest perspective. As always, I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 39. Now that the dust has settled on the 2023-24 NFL season, we can take a look back, take a look in the rearview mirror, and come up with some overall thoughts about what we thought about this season, this Bengals season, this NFL season. Just some general thoughts about me podcasting this first season on Bengal Bites and expectations for the Bengals going forward and for this podcast going forward. In this episode, we're going to talk about the NFL playoffs, just a very quick synopsis because we didn't cover it at all in the show, mostly intentionally, but we're going to cover a few of the minor roster moves that have taken place at the end of this 2023-24 NFL season. The new season is going to kick off next week. So that's why I'm calling this the end of the season, because the next season doesn't officially start until next week. So once we get past next week, we'll call that the start of season 2. But this will be the last episode of season 1 for Bengal Bites. This is kind of the postscript. Anyway, we're going to talk about those simple roster moves, but also player roster moves, but coaching roster moves. There were some shakeups to the Bengals coaching staff that we'll need to talk about. Just some overall thoughts about where the team is headed in terms of some upgrades that they're going to be doing in the facilities and on the field. But that also kind of leads us into the other topic, which was the NFL Players Association, or the Players Union, giving out their annual report cards. The Bengals, again, did not fare very well in some of the most important categories, some of the categories that they had gotten Fs in the previous report cards. They didn't improve in all areas, but we'll get into that a little bit more. And then we'll also, at the end, I'll save it for the end, I'll be a little bit self-indulgent and reflect about recording this podcast in general, how it went, some of the behind the scenes. I give you take a look about recording this podcast, how it went. So getting into this episode 39, the NFL playoffs have come and gone. They're in the rearview mirror, and I didn't do a podcast. This is the first podcast I've done in almost 2 months. I stopped recording as soon as the Bengals season was over, and I didn't record anything. I was kind of disappointed, honestly, with this playoffs. Most of the games were not that entertaining. I think last year, there were a lot more closer games. Some of the games went to overtime last year, but this year, all the games were blowouts. None of them were really even close, especially the early rounds, like wild card, divisional round. Not a lot of good, entertaining football. I mean, they were trying hard and playing hard. It's just the games weren't close for the most part. I mean, it was fun to see the Browns get beat by the Texans 45-14. Joe Flacco threw 2 back-to-back pick 6 interceptions, pretty much sealed the Browns' season. So that was enjoyable. We got to watch the Steelers lose to the Bills, and eventually the Ravens lost to the Chiefs down the road. But yeah, just not a lot of great, exciting games to be had. Not much to talk about. Of course, it was made worse by the fact that the Chiefs continued to win every single week. I wanted the Chiefs to lose so bad every week, and they just kept winning. They played that super cold game against the Dolphins and Tua, which wasn't even really fair, making the Miami the warmest weathered team play in one of the coldest games in NFL history. That was the game where Patrick Mahomes got hit and a chunk of his helmet came flying out, and then they just kept playing the game like it was no big deal, until finally somebody was like, this is obviously broken, get him off the field. And then the Chiefs looked like a bunch of idiots because they didn't have a helmet big enough to fit on top of Patrick Mahomes' big-ass head. So he was trying to shove this little tiny pinhead helmet on his big bulbous noggin, and it just wouldn't fit. He looked ridiculous. The Chiefs, in general, we'll get to them later, but outside of the players and coaches, the Chiefs as an organization seem kind of lackluster and shoddy, if you ask me, but they keep winning, so everybody just, sweeps all that under the rug. If they keep winning Super Bowls, I guess it doesn't matter. But anyway, yeah, the Chiefs, they went on to win the Super Bowl against the 49ers. Even though the 49ers beat the Bengals in both of their first two Super Bowls, I was rooting for them just because they weren't the Chiefs. And unfortunately, it was looking so good in the Super Bowl. The 49ers had the lead. And I didn't actually watch the Super Bowl live. I hate commercials so much that I waited until after the Super Bowl was over, and then I went back and watched it on replay and just skipped past all the commercials. I couldn't skip past all the Taylor Swift, which was unfortunate. They showed Taylor Swift like 30 times during the Super Bowl, and I just, I closed my eyes and like looked away. I don't want any Taylor Swift in my life. I don't know anything about Taylor Swift. I don't know any of her music. I've never seen her perform. I don't care about Taylor Swift at all. My life is much better when there's no Taylor Swift involved. So that really was bothering me trying to watch the Super Bowl, and I got to see all this Taylor Swift who I don't care anything about, much less watching the Chiefs come back, tie it, and then go to overtime and win in overtime. Oh, hooray, Chiefs, back-to-back Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes is like Tom Brady, blah, blah, blah. So that's why I haven't done any podcasting. It just wasn't really in the mood for it. I didn't want to come on here and be super negative, which I'm doing right now, but I couldn't bring myself. I didn't have the energy. The Chiefs really sucked the life out of the NFL playoffs for me. And let's not forget, the Chiefs had a shooting at their Super Bowl victory parade, which is totally a Chiefs thing, right? Bunch of idiots in Missouri with guns. And the reason for the shooting was apparently someone was looking at someone else. So, of course, if someone was looking at you, you got to pull out your gun and start shooting at them in the middle of a crowd, right? That's what you do in Kansas City. So, I'm never going to go to Kansas City. Another reason to never go to Kansas City. People shooting each other for no reason. Not that that doesn't happen everywhere else in this country, but before I go off on even more of a politically laced tangent, let's get onto the Bengals news. So the Bengals, like I had been saying since like last season, put the franchise tag on Tee Higgins. What does that mean? Well, that means that they can only put a franchise tag on one player, as far as I know, per season. And that means that Tee Higgins is going to be locked into a top 5 wide receiver salary for this upcoming season, which is about $21 million. It's not going to be the long-term, multi-year extension that T would like to sign, but, you can't really turn down or be upset that you're getting paid $21 million guaranteed next season, even if it is for 1 year. Tee Higgins was a 33rd overall pick, so I don't know if that's more than he has made combined on his rookie contract, but definitely a big bump up in pay for Tee Higgins. He's got the same agent as Jesse Bates. I anticipate things will go similar to the way things went with Jesse Bates. Get one more season out of Tee Higgins and probably move on depending on how he plays. Again, T has had an up and down career, and this past season, 2023-24, was actually T's worst statistical season that he's had. Barely got over 600 yards receiving, a handful of touchdowns, a handful of big plays, but he was injured for a lot of games, couldn't stay on the field, couldn't take as many snaps and play in the game. Even with the games that he was able to start, he had some hamstring issues, some rib issues where he was in and out of the lineup. They didn't get enough production out of Tee Higgins to really justify a long-term extension after that year, if we're going to be honest. He didn't get... I don't think Tee Higgins has made any Pro Bowls as far as I'm aware. So Tee Higgins, he's got the potential. He's got the physical ability to be that kind of, top of the league wide receiver. He just hasn't put it all together yet. So we'll have to see how T performs this season. Hopefully he can stay healthy, put up bigger numbers than he ever has, hopefully make a Pro Bowl and make a case for him to get a big contract extension, either in Cincinnati or with some other team. Hopefully the Bengals are able to find a way to keep Tee Higgins, But like I said, if some team comes in with some crazy trade offer that they just couldn't refuse, I think the Bengals, even this season, I think they want to keep Tee Higgins around for next season. They've said that. Duke Tobin and Zac Taylor at the combine that just took place in Indianapolis, they were talking about how they look forward to having Tee Higgins on the team next year. But again, that doesn't completely rule out the possibility that if some team came in and made an offer they couldn't refuse, they would have to consider it. Now, the Bengals, the one thing that was interesting about this, I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me at all. It wasn't really a surprise to most people, but the thing that was maybe a little bit interesting was the Bengals did this on the first day that it was possible. So basically, sending a message to everybody in the league that they're not going to play around and maybe they will tag him, maybe they won't. No, they're putting a message out there. If you want Tee Higgins, it's going to cost you big time because we're going to franchise tag him. There have been a few other players that got franchise tagged around the league. Michael Pittman Jr. for the Colts got franchise tagged. L'Jarius Sneed, the cornerback for the Chiefs, got franchise tagged. There may be a couple others I'm not thinking of right now, but a few guys have gotten the tag already. There could be some more coming up we don't know about. There's still time for more players to get tagged. But for the Bengals, really the only other moves that they've made player-wise was A.J. McCarron, the backup quarterback. He got released so he could go play in the USFL this spring. I think that's where he played last season, so he's probably going back to one of his old teams. Get some playing time, get another paycheck. Good for A.J. McCarron. At least he got a couple snaps in the NFL. Speaking of backup quarterbacks, Jake Browning and the long snapper, Cal Adamitis, they signed their exclusive rights free agent tenders, meaning the Bengals are going to keep them around next season at least, and they're going to get paid the league minimum contracts, which is really unfortunate for Jake Browning. He played that second half of the season, showed that he is at least a competent NFL backup, and even, won 3 out of the 7 games that he started. So he could play some winning football. He had, the win against the Jaguars on Monday Night Football. So unfortunately for Jake Browning, he has to stick around with the Bengals and continue making the minimum salary that the Bengals can pay him. And hopefully he can stay healthy. And by the time he gets free, I'm sure he's just going to sign with any other team instead of the Bengals. But he's at least grateful for the opportunity to play for the Bengals. Opposite scenario for Cal Adamitis. He's the long snapper, not a huge in-demand position compared to a quarterback. So Cal Adamitis, he's probably going to make the minimum either way. But Jake Browning, he would definitely be making millions of dollars if he were able to. So it's unfortunate he can't get out of his contract with the Bengals. That's another, the free agent exclusive rights and the franchise tag. These are all mechanisms that NFL owners use to artificially pay the players less money. I know everybody gets all excited. They hear like, oh, Joe Burrow got this huge $250 million contract. Okay, well, Joe Burrow is making, twice as much money as every other player on the team, except for DJ Reader and Trey Hendrickson. And, those are only a handful of the guys. Most of the guys on the team, $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million. So not, crazy amounts of money. I mean, yeah, to most people, $1 million a year is, probably what you would make in 2 decades or something. But for these guys, most of the money is spread out amongst the players more evenly on the lower end. But one of the things that's going to contribute to that everyone getting paid a little bit more is the salary cap for next season is going up by more than 10%. It's going up by $30 million per team per year for the next year. So in the past season, the salary cap was about $225 million for the entire season for the whole team. And the next coming season is going to be about $255 million, $30 million more. So when the Bengals talk about, well, we did a good job of managing our salary cap situation, so we have the money to pay Tee Higgins. Well, you're going to pay Tee Higgins $21 million, and the salary cap is going up by $30 million. So you should have plenty of money to pay Tee Higgins and sign some other good players that they didn't do last year. The Bengals act like they spent all the way up to the salary cap and they were, leveraged to the hilt. Bengals had a lot of salary cap even at the end of the season. They just didn't sign anybody else, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. maybe they were saying, well, they're going to, in theory, they could carry that money over into next season and seasons after that, or they could just keep the money and not pay it to the players. The salary cap is supposed to be like a 50-50 split of the revenue going between the players and the owners. That's how the salary cap is determined. But if the owners don't pay the players all of the salary cap, they can just keep the rest of the money. So it's not a 50-50 split anymore. It's more like 45-55 or 40-60 to the owners. So I'm on to you, Mike Brown. I know what your game is. Oh, we're just managing the salary cap. It's not that we're not paying the players money. It's just that we're being conservative with the money and not giving it to the players. Whatever. So salary cap is going up. That means they need to sign more players and not settle for guys like Irv Smith Jr. at tight end, who, there's no defense of Irv Smith Jr.'s performance last year because it was absolutely terrible. He was one of the worst tight ends in the league. He was a healthy scratch for some of the last games of the season. He was so ineffective. But at the same time, he was getting paid the minimum salary that the Bengals could pay him. He was getting paid the veteran minimum salary for players who have played in the league for a few years already. So it's not like the Bengals went out and broke the bank and signed some kind of big name top tight end. They got the cheapest possible tight end that they could sign. And no surprise, he played like garbage. And they had guys from the practice squad coming up and starting over him into the season in Tanner Hudson. And, people from the Bengals are going to be like, oh, well, Drew Sample and Tanner Hudson and Mitch Wilcox, those guys together, you put them all together and combine their production into one, that's a pretty good tight end. That's no replacement for having an actual good tight end, which Irv Smith Jr. was not at all. Along those same lines, somebody else who's probably not going to be returning to the team next year, Nick Scott, the safety that they signed from the Rams on a 2-year contract, they're going to have to get out of that second year because he was, again, one of the worst players at his position in the entire NFL. He wasn't playing barely at all. He got replaced by Jordan Battle, the rookie, towards the end of the season. Nick Scott's got to go. So players like this, they really missed on signing last year in free agency, and part of it was because they just didn't pay up for the good players. They settled for these guys who were still hanging around towards the end of the free agency period, wanted lower amounts of money. That's what the Bengals were looking for, and you get what you pay for. If you're not paying your free agents a lot of money, you're not going to get a lot of performance, and that's what happened last year. So hopefully the Bengals learned some kind of a lesson from that, or maybe they learned that saving money on free agents is good and they can just keep continuing to profit off of not paying them that much. I don't know, because fans still came to all the games. All the games were mostly sellout. It was like 99% was the lowest turnout at any Bengals home game. So fans were definitely turning out to the games, no matter if it was Joe Burrow or Jake Browning, no matter if they were winning or losing. It didn't matter. Fans were still showing up, spending money, and that's really all that the owners care about. They honestly, like I said, the fact that, Zac Taylor can get up at the combine and say, well, we didn't, get to the playoffs. We didn't achieve our goals in that regard, so it wasn't a good season. But from Mike Brown and Katie Blackburn's perspective, they're raking in millions and millions of dollars in revenue, concessions, ticket sales, merchandise, TV deals, sponsorships, so many revenue streams coming in for them. They win the Super Bowl every year, and this year was no exception. And given the fact that the salary cap is going up by $30 million, that should tell you how successful all these teams are, and anticipate that the salary cap is going to go up even more next year. So don't let these teams tell you, oh, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. It's all complete nonsense. They're just greedy. Another thing I have a problem with, the coaching moves that the Bengals made, or lack thereof. So Brian Callahan, he's been the offensive coordinator the entire time Zac Taylor has been head coach of the Bengals. And we didn't really know who was the brains involved in the offense, if there was any. But Zac Taylor was calling the plays. Brian Callahan was sitting up in the press box, communicating with Zac about what plays should they call or whatever. But Brian Callahan has been getting interviews in the offseason, and he got hired as the Tennessee Titans head coach. So he's gone, and he also took his dad, who was the offensive line coach for the Cleveland Browns. He moved on to be the offensive line coach for his son down in Tennessee. So we got Bill Callahan out of the AFC North. He's not going to be coaching for the Browns anymore, but we also lost Brian Callahan to the Titans. Now, in place of Brian Callahan, they promoted the quarterbacks coach, Dan Pitcher. And then in place of Dan Pitcher, they promoted an assistant quarterbacks coach to be the head quarterback coach in Brad Craigthorpe. And all of these guys are like carbon copies of Zac Taylor. They all played at like small school college. They never played in the NFL. Their dad was a head coach of their high school football team, or, one guy is like his dad and his grandfather was a football coach. It's like, give me a fucking break with these guys. They all look like carbon copies of Zac Taylor. They also hired another guy, Justin Riscotti, to be the passing game coordinator from the Vikings. He's been in a few places in the NFL, but also college. He never played in the NFL either. They hired some other offensive assistant, Jordan Sulkin. He never played in the NFL either. So they got all of these offensive coaches who never played in the NFL. They probably all played like D3 quarterback, and their dad was probably the coach. I don't understand why they have to hire the exact same guy to be on the offensive coaching staff so they can just promote like all the way up the ladder. If in case Zac Taylor leaves, they'll just keep promoting, Dan Pitcher up the chain. Really not a lot of creativity, new ideas, diversity of thought, diversity of anything in any of these coaching hires. On the defensive side, their safeties coach, Rob Livingston, who I was a fan of Rob Livingston, but he left to go be the defensive coordinator at the University of Colorado with the Buffaloes and Deion Sanders. So he's leaving the NFL as an assistant to take a defensive coordinator position at Colorado. I wouldn't be surprised if you see more of this taking place. Most of the time you see guys going from college to the NFL. As more money starts to flow into these college programs, I wouldn't be surprised to see more coaches kind of going back and forth depending on which opportunity is better for them. So Rob Livingston's leaving the Bengals I think he's been with them. He was with them for a few years, at least 5 or so. And they also hired Ronnie Regula as a defensive assistant, Ben Jacobs as a special teams assistant, because one of the Bengals special teams assistant coaches went down to Tennessee to be the Titans special teams coordinator. I don't really care enough to look up that guy's name, but I just remember that the Bengals assistant special teams guy is going to be the Titans special teams coach. But other than that, we didn't see any other Bengals coaches getting interviewed for coaching positions with the Titans. That was one of the things that people were kind of, maybe concerned about, is when you have somebody like Brian Callahan leave, is he going to take some of the Bengals coaching staff with him down to Tennessee? I don't know if he had some kind of a deal worked out where he wouldn't poach other Bengals coaches, or if he just decided he didn't want any of the Bengals coaches on his coaching staff. I don't know for sure. But, fortunately for the Bengals, only one of the other coaches besides Brian Callahan left with him. Now, like I said, I've never heard of any of these guys. These guys are not big name hires. They didn't play in the NFL. They've barely coached in the NFL, most of them. So I can't really say I'm that excited about any of these new hires. I don't want to judge a book by its cover, but all of these books have the same cover. Or to put it another way, I don't want to paint these guys with too broad of a brush, but the paint that we're using to paint these guys is all the same shade of paint. And it's not the same shade of paint that the players are being painted with. They don't really look like most of the players that are on the team. And I don't really know how well they'll be able to communicate to the players on their level, having never played in the NFL. They don't really know about their background. They don't, they come from a totally different culture, I guess you could say. Like some of these guys literally sound exactly like Zac Taylor. They are from Oklahoma. They sound exactly like him. It's just like, if I were a player, I'd be kind of freaked out. Like, why are they hiring all the same coach and none of them look like me? So I don't know if it's like the organization, because when you see a picture of the Bengals staff, like the support staff, not the coaches, but I'm talking about like the people who work in the office, they all have a certain shade of paint. There's not a lot of diversity in the whole organization. It seems like, just in general, a trend. I'm not going to point any fingers or make any accusations about anything, but definitely not on the cutting edge of diversity. And some people, that's a bad word for whatever reason. Just given the fact of the players and how diverse they come from all different walks of life, it's kind of weird how the Bengals as an organization don't really mirror that at all. Maybe it's Zac Taylor just can't deal with anybody who is going to have any kind of different opinions. Maybe he doesn't want anybody with a different point of view. Maybe he is too weak of a leader to have anybody challenge him, or he's scared that the players will actually, gravitate towards some of these other coaches who are more similar to them. I don't know what it is, but they seem to have a very strict division between like players and coaches. I don't know. I just get plantation vibes is all I'm saying. I'm just putting it out there. I mean, maybe the other common denominator is all these guys are cheap. I'm assuming like they didn't cost that much to hire these guys, and that's probably what Mike Brown is looking for, among other things. So maybe that has something to do with it. But anyway, speaking of cheap, the Bengals are going to get rid of their old, terrible artificial turf and put in brand new artificial turf. Hooray. They're going to get the latest and greatest of artificial turf, just like they did 8 years ago. And people continue to have leg injuries and knee injuries and all kinds of horrible, debilitating issues. But the Bengals are going to continue to be the only AFC North team without a grass playing surface. They're going to put in new monofilament field turf. It's still going to have the black rubber pellets. It's going to be just like the turf that they have in Carolina and in New York at MetLife Stadium and a few other stadiums around the NFL. So they're at least going to be on par with all the other, or a lot of the other teams in the NFL that use artificial turf. That was one of the big things that really stuck out like a sore thumb. Was the Colts and the Vikings were the two other teams in the NFL that still had split film turf, which is basically like the turf is all one unified, uniform piece, like a big carpet laying on the ground. And that can, players can get their foot stuck in that and it gets really injured really quickly. So this new turf is supposed to be like monofilament, where like each blade of fake grass is kind of independent from the others. So they're not uniformly held together like one giant carpet. It should move a little bit more naturally and not have issues where players get their foot stuck in the ground. And hopefully that will lead to fewer injuries. We'll have to see. I still would think the players would prefer grass or something more natural. Like in Tennessee, they actually have an artificial surface, but underneath they don't have the rubber pellets. They've got an organic fill. It's mostly crushed up walnut shells and coconut shells and different kinds of organic plant matter that's ground up, not to a powder, but more something that can, be drained easily, but it's not a cancer-causing, rubber ground up tires. It should be a little bit more forgiving on people's bodies. I would have liked to see the Bengals go something more that direction, a little bit more advanced, but obviously that probably costs more money, which the Bengals aren't down for. So they're going to, field turf isn't even that expensive. You see it on high schools, colleges, everywhere. So it's not, really that amazing. But, good for the Bengals. They're getting up to the bare minimum of every other team in the league. That's kind of what it feels like they're also doing with their locker room upgrades. Because when you looked at interviews of Bengals in the locker room, it didn't really look like a professional locker room. So the Bengals announced they're going to upgrade the locker rooms, upgrade the bathrooms, upgrade the facilities that the players spend most of their time in when they're not out on the practice field, which is good because it looked like a college, maybe not even a good college locker room. Like it was probably, I'm assuming a lot of players who had come from big time college programs walked into this locker room and it was for the Bengals at Paycor Stadium, and it looked like a step down probably for a lot of them. So good that the Bengals are at least getting the locker room up to standards of some big college teams and the rest of the NFL. Now, how do I know how the Bengals rank compared to the rest of the NFL? Well, the NFL Players Association put out their annual survey, their grades for the team, and all the different categories. And let's just go through them. Overall, the Bengals ranked 26th out of 32 NFL teams in terms of all these different gradings. But specifically, we'll go through each category. The Bengals go through each category here. Now, some of these NFL owners would have you believe that these grades aren't really that important and we shouldn't really pay attention to them and don't look at the bad grades that we're getting because they're biased or whatever else. Let's go through, and we'll start at the top because I have a feeling they rank these this way, not alphabetically, but in terms of importance to the players. So let's start at the top. The first three grades in these categories, Bengals got F-, 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 dead last in the league. Can't get worse than F- in all three of the first three categories. So treatment of families. Bengals got an F-. They are one of 12 teams that do not provide families with any kind of family room at the stadium. So on game day, players' families, their children, they don't have anywhere to go to stay out of the cold. And it does get cold there. There's no daycare provided by the team. There's only 7 teams in the league like that. Bengals are only the one of only 4 teams that do not offer a family room or daycare. There hasn't been much improvement in this regard because we did get a report of this last year. We saw players' wives and girlfriends having to nurse their kids like on the floor of a public bathroom because there's no place for them to go, which is ridiculous. You know, how much is it? But of course, they can't spare a luxury box for the players' families because they're not paying money. So they can go, do whatever. I guess the Bengals say can go kick rocks, as they say. It's food and cafeteria. This is one of the things that doesn't make any sense. You are what you eat, but the Bengals got an F- in food cafeteria. They don't serve 3 meals a day every day. They make the players basically fend for themselves for food on a lot of the days, even when they're in the stadium working out, which doesn't make any sense. If the players, they're trying to build up their bodies to play, they should have good tasting food available to them that's nutritious so they can build up their bodies. They got 30th in overall food taste and 31st in overall food freshness, meaning they're probably getting a lot of prepackaged, garbage that's not made fresh by an actual chef on site. It's probably something that's shipped in like a, styrofoam crate with a ham sandwich and an apple or something like that. And not only that, they don't open up the cafeteria on the players' off days, even if the players are coming in to work out on those days. So the players have to bring their own food to the stadium if they want to eat anything, which is on top of that. Not only do they not offer food on a regular basis, they don't even have a nutritionist or a dietitian on staff. They're the only NFL team that does not have a full-time dietitian. So you've got guys who are coming straight out of college, living on their own out of their parents' house. They're eating, McDonald's, they're eating candy, they're eating a bunch of garbage that's not good for professional athletes, and they don't have anyone directing them, guiding them, telling them what they should be eating, putting into their bodies to perform at their optimum levels. A lot of these guys go out and hire their own nutritionists, dietitians, because it's not provided to them by the team. If the Bengals wanted their players to succeed and perform at the highest level, avoid injuries, recover faster, work out harder, all those things, they would have a dietitian on staff. You got guys like, what was that guy from LSU, that super fat guy? Tyler Shelvin. Remember Tyler Shelvin? He came in super out of shape and super overweight, and he left the Bengals the exact same way. He didn't improve at all. He didn't lose any weight. He didn't look like he was in any better shape, probably because he didn't get any dietary help from the Bengals at all. So those were the worst aspects of the Bengals report card. And they started off with the top three. You could say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Maybe they happen to have the three in the beginning. I think they put those three in the beginning for a reason, because they're important. So the Bengals are failing in three of the most important categories. After that, they get a D+, 24th overall in the locker room. Players feel like the locker room is okay, but the biggest thing was the bathrooms. It sounded like they had constant plumbing problems. They only had 5 functioning toilets for the entire team, which, if you consider there's like, at times can be, when they're in training camp, like 90 some guys in there, and they only have 5 toilets, not very good. And the showers were not having warm water, didn't have good water pressure. Sounds kind of like a nightmare, honestly, with the whole bathroom situation. That's something that's kind of inexcusable. It's not, get some plumbers in there, fix it up. It shouldn't be something that's going on year after year. Like, okay, something breaks, fix it. Don't be like every year we just have terrible facilities. Now, on the positive end of the spectrum, the Bengals training room and training staff both got B+. Training room, they did upgrade in the offseason. So this was one of their negative categories from last year that they upgraded. So they got more cold tubs, more hot tubs, more rehab space. I think they expanded it, so they gave them more room to recover. So that was an upgrade over last year's grade. And the training staff, I think they got a new trainer also. And they didn't get terrible grades in the training staff, but they got a B+, 6th overall. And 95% of the players feel like they have enough one-on-one treatment, which is 2nd overall in the NFL. So in terms of one-on-one treatment with the training staff, Bengals are doing a good job and an improved job over last year. Also, the weight room is one of the positive aspects for the Bengals. They have B+ in weight room facilities. They feel like they have enough equipment. They have enough space to work out. So that was 10th overall. And the strength coaches got an A-, which was 9th overall. Generally, players will rank their strength coaches in their weight room pretty good, unless, they're absolutely just falling apart. But most of the players felt like the strength coaches, the workout was sufficient and productive for their needs. Now, the nutrition aspect goes along with that. So if you're just working out, doing all this stuff, but then when you go to eat, you have like a pack of combos and a high C, your body is not going to, build itself up from that workout. So they need to put both of these things together. They need to get the nutrition and the working out hand in hand to get the best results. Travel was kind of a not so great category, got 20th. C. Bengals, they don't have to have teammates, but, probably not flying first class and living in the most expensive luxury hotels when they go on the road. Head coach, Zac Taylor, got an A, which he got 10th overall with an A. So you got to feel like most players probably rank their head coach pretty highly if that's the case. 98% of players felt like Zac was efficient with their time, which is 3rd overall, which I can kind of see that. Zac seems like a player's coach kind of guy where he doesn't overly tax the players and have them do like ridiculously long practices and stuff. And then ownership was the last category. Mike Brown got a C+, which was the 25th out of 32 NFL owners in terms of his willingness to invest in the facilities. So 25th overall, not the worst. I think he was lower than that a couple years ago. I think he was like 30th or 31st. So improving slightly, but not really the greatest in terms of investing in the player. But what does this all mean? This whole grading report card. What is the point of this? Part of it is just to honestly shame some of these owners and clubs that aren't providing adequate facilities for their players. This is kind of the players mechanism to try to get something accomplished outside of the collective bargaining agreement. Collective bargaining agreement only, what's that, like once every 10 or 12 years? That's way longer than most of these guys' NFL careers are going to last. So in terms of something getting done in the short term for the players while they're still with the teams that they're on and they haven't gotten traded yet, something that could happen, within the next 12 months, this report card shines a light on that, which I think is a great for transparency, which you don't see a lot of, unfortunately, from the NFL. And this is going to be a message to some of the other players in terms of what to expect if you're going to be a free agent. A rookie doesn't have a choice about where they play, but free agents do have a choice, and they can look and say which teams are in the best situation with their facilities, with their coaches, with their ownership, and which teams are not looking so great. Now, the Chiefs, they got even worse scores than the Bengals did. The owner got the worst score of any owner. Part of it is because the Chiefs have really old stadium, very old facilities, and they've promised to upgrade their facilities, their locker rooms, but they didn't. They said, oh, well, you guys went to the Super Bowl last year, so we didn't have enough time to upgrade the locker room, which is a bunch of horse shit. You could have plenty of time. Make a temporary locker room for the players to work out in while the new one is being prepared. It's just a total excuse that they don't want to spend any money to upgrade the locker room. So hopefully, not that I care about the Chiefs at all, but hopefully Clark Hunt will get his act together after winning all these Super Bowls and maybe give back a little bit to the players. But as we head into this free agency, hopefully those grades will entice more good players to come join the Bengals than they did last season. Who knows? Everybody was like, oh, Joe Burrow is such a magnet for free agents. Everybody will want to come and play for the Bengals. Well, guess what? They don't really care about Joe Burrow. They care about money and their family and enjoying their life. And whether that's what the Bengals are with Joe Burrow, whatever. I think if they had to choose between playing with Joe Burrow or having their wife sitting on the floor of a public bathroom nursing their baby, or having their wife, in some kind of warm place where they could stay, have the wife in the warmth, forget Joe Burrow, you're still making the same amount of money. So, whatever. These are things that you have to weigh. But moving on to some general reflections of me recording this podcast. This is the first podcast I've ever done. If you couldn't tell, I'm not that good at it yet. So that's why I wanted to get back on the horse before, too many months go by and before I lose track of how to even make a podcast. Got to record another one. But I wanted to get through this season. I didn't miss any games. I didn't miss any recaps for the entire season. I was proud of that. Some podcasts took a week off here and there where the Bengals lost Joe Burrow or they lost games. They were out of the mix for the playoffs. Other podcasts may not have recorded every week, but I was here every week, rain or shine, no matter what. Even if I wanted to or I was excited to or not. I didn't really have a ton of expectations about this podcast or what would happen, how popular it would get or not. And that's good because it did not get very popular, which probably should have been expected. I didn't market it or promote it at all. I don't have a huge online following of social media people who could tune in. It's just mostly my friends and my family and myself listening to this podcast. So to the few people who asked me, did I stop doing the podcast? Are you going to record another podcast ever? Thank you for at least asking if I was dead or if I was coming back with the podcast or what. So I'm going to continue doing the podcast into season 2, but I did need a little bit of a break just because I took so much time recording and editing the podcast. That's it. Recording the podcast, preparing for the podcast, it's time consuming, but more time consuming, perhaps surprisingly, was the editing. I spent so much time editing, trying to get every little and weird mouth noise and licking my lips and all that kind of stuff out of the podcast so that you as a listener or myself as the listener didn't have to listen to some kind of terrible podcast audio. I listen to a lot of podcasts myself and I hear things like, oh, I didn't like that. They shouldn't have done this. I could do this better. So I got a newfound appreciation for everybody out there who does do a podcast. It's not easy at all. I can't say that it's like harder or easier than I thought it was. I don't know how easy I thought it was going to be. Definitely not easy, especially when you're doing it by yourself. Not easy because I have to do everything. There's nobody else to pass the work off to. All these ideas are my own, whether you like them or not. But part of that was by design because I had a certain idea for the tone and the messaging that I wanted to have for this show. And maybe I was a little bit greedy or protective in not inviting other people to come on the show with me because I was afraid that they might take it off into their own, put their own spin on things and take it in their own direction that I didn't necessarily want the show to go in. So that's why I did it all myself so I could have my own vision, kind of like a movie director, the singular vision of the artiste. But I'm not very artistic. Auteur, is that what you call it? Anyway, that's what this podcast was. So I'm going to try to not edit as much. I'm still going to edit the podcast, but I can't be spending like 3 hours editing a podcast anymore. It just takes too much of my life for no money. That's the thing. It's like this podcast is for free. I don't have any subscribers or donators. I don't have any advertisers or sponsors or anything like that. This is totally a pro bono podcast. So in realistic terms, I can't spend hours and hours every week on this podcast. So I got to cut it back a little bit. So you might notice a little bit lower production values. Hopefully not. Hopefully by the time I get this all figured out, it'll be smooth sailing. You won't even know anything changed. But that'll free me up to live a little bit more life when I'm not working. I do have an actual job, if you can believe it. I got a full-time job. So I got to worry about that. I got to, focus on that a little bit so I don't get fired because I work in computers and technology and there's a bunch of layoffs going on in many industries these days. But, layoffs here and there, a few hundred people here and there getting laid off, losing their jobs, not having any income. And the podcast isn't going to be making me any income, that's for sure. So I got to stay on top of that. And also, football isn't everything. So after football season was over, I got into some video games, which I hadn't been really paying much attention to recently. So what did I play? Oh, because I got a new, not that anybody cares, got a new video card, and that is able to do the ray tracing. So if you know anything about video cards and the ray tracing, it's like the newest technology for putting 3D images up on your screen. It looks much more realistic. The reflections, oh my goodness, the reflections in the wet pavement on the ground looks so amazing. So I got into some of that. I played Portal. I played all the way through Portal, RTX. Played a little bit of Cyberpunk. The graphics in Cyberpunk look good. The game itself, kind of janky. I was a little bit disappointed, so I played some of that. And what else? I played Talos Principle, another great puzzle game. After I played Portal, I was in the mood for some more puzzle games, so I played Talos Principle. Great one. There's a Talos Principle 2, so I got to get that when it's on sale. I'll play that one too. But what else I got? I got Red Dead Redemption 2 on sale for like $8. So at some point I'll play that. But all these games I can play with this new video card. They look amazing. So that's pretty cool. I heard this game, Balatro, is supposed to be pretty good. It's like a card game. Might play that if it goes on sale. So, it's all kinds of stuff going on. So much excitement. Speaking of excitement, we just saw the NFL Combine kick off. Everybody running around. Like I say, they should wear pads and a helmet in all these drills so you get a more accurate depiction of how they're going to actually play when they get on the field, because they're not going to wear track sprinting shoes and spandex when they're playing football. So the fact that they're doing all these drills in like no clothes, not really realistic. But anyway, after the Combine is when the season officially starts. That's when we're going to see more moves probably going to take place. Free agency, signing, players coming and going. The draft will be in a couple months. We might do a mock draft or two heading up to that. But I don't watch that much college football, so I don't know most of these players that well to say who's good and who's not. And since the Bengals are drafting at 18th, it's not like we can have a debate among, which top 5 players should they pick. When we had Joe Burrow or the field or Jamar Chase versus Penei Sewell By the way, Jamar Chase was still the correct pick. And, so down in the middle of the pack, you don't know who's still going to be available to pick. There's going to be some good player that the Bengals are going to draft. And when they draft him, I'll hopefully be supportive of the pick. Hopefully it's not a punter. They're going to have to get another punter, though. That's, not in the draft. Maybe sign one, because there's guys who can punt out there just walking around. You don't need to draft a punter. Waste a pick on that. But there's plenty of time to get into all that, what's going to happen in this upcoming offseason, free agency, all that kind of stuff. So we'll get into that in season 2. This has been an exciting, eventful season 1. Thank you for sticking with me. I'm taking a break. Maybe I'll be a little bit more consistent in the podcast. I was so just, I don't know if depressed is the right word, but just I was avoiding all things football in the NFL around that whole Chiefs Super Bowl period. This made me so sick to my stomach watching the Chiefs win again. It really just did not make me want to punch. I didn't want to talk about the Chiefs. I didn't want to think about the Chiefs. I didn't want to watch the Chiefs. None of it. Just fuck the Chiefs forever, basically. So with that, we're going to get on out of here. But thank you for joining me. Don't forget to follow the show, do all the stuff, give me a thumbs up. We'll be back next time on another episode of Bengal Bites. So until then, what do I say? Stay hungry. See, that's what happens when you forget. So until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.